Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the absolute most iconic, mesmerizing, and honestly surprisingly demanding dynamics in the entire marine world, the clownfish and its host anemone. I mean, few aquarium setups capture nature's drama quite like this one, right? But underneath the beautiful surface of this symbiotic relationship lies a really intricate set of rules. Building a thriving display requires way more than just dropping these two marine creatures into the same tank. It requires precision, a ton of patience, and a deep understanding of what actually makes them tick.
Here's our roadmap for today's explainer. First, the captive reality. Second, meet the limiting factor. Third, compatible matchmaking. Fourth, the waiting game. And finally, ecosystem balance. Let's just jump right in.
Part 1. The captive reality. Nature's drama in a glass box. Okay, so let's look at this really stark contrast. In the wild ocean, this relationship is beautifully mutual. The anemone provides the clownfish with shelter and protection right there among its stinging tentacles. And in return, the clownfish vigorously defends its territory and actually contributes vital nutrients through its waste. It's this perfect evolutionary trade-off. But when we move to captivity, this dynamic completely shifts. The display only works if you, the aquarist, perfectly replicate the highly specific conditions that allow the anemone to thrive. You become the ultimate provider. You can't rely on the ocean's infinite natural balance anymore. You have to construct it yourself, totally from scratch. And that brings us to part 2, meet the limiting factor. Or, as we should probably call it, appeasing the diva. Before you even think about purchasing a single piece of livestock, you've got to understand one core concept. The anemone is the limiting factor. That means it's the component that sets the absolute baseline for survival in your display. It dictates the rules of the household, period. It demands strict water quality, precise lighting, and absolute chemical stability before anything else can even be considered. You really have to think of it as a highly demanding, super high-maintenance houseguest. If the anemone isn't happy, the entire display fails. What's truly fascinating here is the massive difference in hardiness between these two roommates. The clownfish, it can tolerate a surprisingly wide range of marine parameters. It's a really adaptable, easygoing resident. But the anemone is entirely unforgiving. For an anemone, stable temperature and extremely low fluctuations matter just as much as the exact reading on your test kits. It needs impeccably clean, highly oxygenated water with totally consistent salinity. It demands disciplined feeding and really strict nitrate control. You're dealing with two completely different tolerance levels, and you absolutely must cater to a most sensitive one. Now, this delicate balance extends to another critical requirement, and that's lighting. Lighting is an absolute make-or-break factor because a lot of anemones rely on photosynthetic symbionts, basically tiny algae living within their tissues, just to survive. Because of that, they require a very specific light intensity and spectrum. If the lighting is too weak, the anemone doesn't just look kind of dull, its photosynthetic symbionts slowly deteriorate, which essentially starves the animal. On the flip side, if you blast it with light that's too strong without properly acclimating it first, the anemone is going to respond with massive stress and retraction. It's a real tightrope walk to find that perfect illumination. All right, part 3, compatible matchmaking. Finding the right roommate. So the crucial point here is that you can't just throw any clownfish and any anemone into a tank together and expect some magical instant pairing. Not every clownfish pairs with every anemone. You really have to heed a few strict matchmaking warnings. Compatibility varies drastically by species and even by local strains. Now, while common combinations often pair certain amphiprion clownfish species with Entacmea anemones, which you'll often see sold as bubble tips, you still have to verify this compatibility from reliable husbandry sources. Please don't just rely on general assumptions. Plus, you've got to plan your tank layout around the anemone's physical footprint. Some will stay put and remain pretty small, but others expand widely. If you don't anticipate that expansion, those tentacles can intensely sting your nearby corals and tank mates, and that just creates a chaotic environment for everyone. Let's move to part 4, the waiting game. Patience and placement. Even when you've got perfectly compatible species, timing is going to heavily influence your success. The settling process happens in very strict stages. First off, anemones often take time to securely attach and literally choose their own home spot. They might actually move around your tank repeatedly in those early days. During this critical window, you have to restrain yourself. Step 2, keep the water flow, the rockwork, and all your equipment completely stable. Frequent rearranging or aggressive adjustments will just prevent the anemone from ever establishing itself. Finally, step 3,
Allow the clownfish to interact naturally. Depending on your setup, the clownfish might adopt the anemone once it stabilizes, or it might literally just hover nearby for a while. Both of those are totally normal phases, not a sign of failure. You just have to give them time. I want to pause on this exact quote directly from our source material. A clownfish can become a stressor for an anemone that isn't ready. This is such a fascinating and honestly counterintuitive dynamic. We so often want to rush to see them together, but adding the clownfish too early, while the anemone is still stressed, unattached, and unsettled, can actually undermine your entire display. The clownfish's natural instinct is to nestle and rub against the anemone, and that can completely overwhelm it before it even has the strength to host. And that leads us nicely into Part 5, Ecosystem Balance, Managing the Long-Term Relationship. Keeping these animals alive for years requires a very holistic, ongoing maintenance strategy. First, you've got to consider the water flow. It has to be strong enough to keep detritus from settling and to deliver vital oxygen, but you have to really fine-tune your powerhead outlets. If the flow is too direct, it'll flatten the poor anemone against the glass like a pancake, preventing its tentacles from functioning. Next up is feeding. A lot of successful aquarists actually feed sparingly, focusing instead on maintaining that excellent lighting and stable environment we talked about. Overfeeding the tank can rapidly spike nutrients, trigger algae blooms, and cause massive water quality swings that will quickly harm a sensitive anemone. Finally, avoid sudden chemical shifts. Whether it's dumping in new additives, doing an overly large water change, or adding untested equipment, a sudden shift can undo literally weeks of hard-earned stability. This quote perfectly summarizes the entire overarching framework of our explainer today. There are absolutely no shortcuts here. A successful symbiotic display is less about a single trick and more about patience, compatibility planning, and maintaining consistent conditions that allow both animals to flourish. It's not about finding a magic chemical additive or the perfect piece of rock. It's entirely about disciplined, consistent, and patient care that prioritizes the needs of the most delicate organism in the tank. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a question to really reflect on. Are you ready to build a stable, living ecosystem, or just a fish tank? Because maintaining this stunning display of marine life requires real gravity, patience, and meticulous care. But if you can provide that unwavering consistency, you get to witness one of nature's most incredible partnerships right there in your own home. Thanks so much for joining me on The Explainer today. Keep learning, and as always, keep observing the fascinating world around you.